Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 33 of the podcast. I'm your host, Melissa, and this week I am joined by Puneeta Chitwal-Varma of the website Maple and Marigold, which is a site that is all about real food, sustainable living, viewed through the lens of cultural fusion, which I think is something a lot of Canadians can probably relate to. She is also the founder of Nourished by Numbers, which is a public service initiative about growing a healthier planet through better food choices. She describes herself as a better food advocate, which is a term that I absolutely love. And she's joining us today from Toronto, and I'm so excited to have you here, Puneeta. Welcome.
Hi, Melissa. I'm so happy to be here.
So we have a lot to talk about today. We've just been chatting before we started recording on all the things that Puneeta is up to, and I'm really excited to dive into it. But Puneeta, you're currently in Toronto. You are also the first mom we've had on the show. I just realized that.
Oh, wow. That feels like a label that I'm very glad to accept, right, Mom?
I didn't even notice that until we just talked a few minutes ago. Like, you're my first mom on the show. So we can talk a little bit about how you manage all the things, because I know when you're a mom, there's a lot of juggling that goes on in the background. Although you make it look very easy, I have to say. So.
Thank you so much. It doesn't feel easy on this side of the fence.
I am sure it doesn't.
Especially today, right?
Especially right now, yes.
With the global pandemic, what else is life going to throw at us?
It's been an interesting year. What is that? Isn't that a curse? May you live in interesting times.
Yes. At least life is interesting every day.
Exactly. So you are currently based in Toronto, and for those of you in the Toronto area, you may have seen Puneeta on TV. She's been on CBC, Global News, CHCH, doing segments about food, sustainable living, and Indian celebrations. So we're going to be talking about more about that next week. We're going to be talking a little bit about how to get extra press for your business and how to secure segments on TV, which I think is something that people think is a big mystery, but it's actually something that if you give it a shot, you'd be surprised how many television stations out there might be very interested in what you have to say. So we'll get into that.
For sure. Yes.
We'll get into that.
Yes, and this avenue was a great mystery for me. And I had someone who held my hand through it in the initial months. And so I am totally glad to share what I know.
That would be awesome. But you are not from Canada. You grew up in India. Whereabouts in India are you from?
So my dad was in the Indian Army. He was a military man, and we moved every 18 months, every 24 months, because Army is more than a career. It's a lifestyle, which means that the kids, the family members, we basically uproot ourselves and move and live on Army cantonments in India. And it's an amazing life because it's very different from what your friends have. But at the same time, it's hard because you leave your friends behind every couple of years, right? And you start off in a new school. And from a kid's point of view, it's hard because you start making new friends and making connections with your teachers all over again. So I often struggle with identifying a location that I'm from in India, because while my grandparents lived in Delhi and in Punjab, I don't speak Punjabi. We moved around so much that I feel as connected to Western Punjab, to Western India and Southern India and Mumbai and Calcutta as much as I do to Punjab. So I often identify as just being Indian and you see that in my food too, because my food that I cook for my family is influenced by all of these little bits and pieces from different locations in India.
Oh, because I know Indian cuisine has a lot of regional applications to it. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Totally.
My dad was
Totally.
in the Air Force, so I can relate a little bit. He left the Air Force just before my brother was born. So, but when I was born just off of just outside of CFB Comox, so.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Oh my God! Another thread, right?
It's a very different lifestyle, and so I was very fortunate in that we didn't move around once I started school. But I know that he spent the first 15 years of his career in the Air Force basically the same thing every 18 to 24 months. And that's actually how he met my mom. He wound up stationed in the UK for a little bit, and my mom's from England, so. Yeah.
Wow. So it is a totally different lifestyle,
Very
right?
different,
I
yeah.
have friends who are Air Force brats, and then I'm an Army brat, and this is the niche that I grew up in, because you grow up as a person with very few roots, and because you're so used to transplanting yourself, and you also become really adaptive of change. There's so much that's always going on, right? My mom and dad were, they wouldn't let us put nails in the wall in the house that we lived in, because we knew that we had to return the house to the organization that managed the accommodations for the Army. So we were used to just pasting things and be able to pack up and move every couple of years. That's just the life that we had, and I loved it. I have to say, my parents sacrificed a lot to keep all four of us, my brother and I and my mom and dad, together, because what often happens in Army families is that the kids end up in boarding school, because that's one way to help the children have some sort of, permanence.
Yeah, yeah.
So we didn't go down that route. We ended up staying together, but that meant we sacrificed, right, any feeling of permanence.
Yeah. I think it gives you a lot of skills, though, as you become older. I mean, you're always so comfortable. You appear very comfortable in any situation I see you in, so I don't know if you feel that way underneath, but I would imagine it gives you, I mean, you really do have to become skilled at social interaction if you want to make new friends, right? You're constantly in a situation where you are meeting new people.
Yes, and you get used to introducing yourself, and often you're the kid who starts in the middle of the year, right? Yes. You're not. You're hardly ever, as an Army brat, you're hardly ever lucky to time your move with the start of the school year. That never happens. So you're often the kid in the middle of fall or the middle of winter who has to stand up in front of your new schoolmates, in front of the teacher, because the teacher will often pick on you and say, hey, introduce yourself, Puneeta. And so you get used to standing up and introducing yourself. But I have to say, I am a closet introvert. I am happy to not be going out and having my face out there. The days that I'm at home right now, for example, I love that this is a audio only, because I don't need to wear makeup. I can sit with my socks on, comfortable. Right?
I know.
So every event, every big appearance that I do, I love to have some downtime after and just regroup my energies, because I guess that's the habit I had as well, right? Because it takes a lot out of you. And even though that life is so enjoyable, there is, you need the quiet time, as we tell kids.
Yes, you need that time to recharge your batteries. I totally get that. I'm an introvert. So while I can be very extroverted for short periods of time, I definitely need that time at home to just kind of soak up the silence. Yes.
And not have to talk to people, and and do your own thing, right? That's so important to help recharge.
So as your dad traveled with the Army, were you did you ever get the opportunity to travel outside of India, or were you mostly internal transfers?
It was mostly internal transfers. That was the work he did. But what happened a few times in various cities was that we would be on the border, and so we have lived close to the border with Pakistan and close to the border with China and Nepal. So as you get closer to the border of India, further away from central India, the influence of the refugees and the influence of people in the other countries gets stronger. So you tend to, the language changes, the food, the dances, the culture, all of that kind of changes. And it's a wonderful experience. So we didn't move out of India, but I feel as if we lived in remote parts of the country that I wouldn't have, now that I think about it, I wouldn't have had the chance to experience any of that culture and food in the extreme parts of India if we hadn't been part of the army, right? Because if you're in the army, your family goes with you to places in northern India, in Kashmir, and in eastern India, which is Assam, which has a heavy influence of China. So it's a wonderful life to be able to see the country from a different perspective.
Yeah, it must just be a feast for your internal senses, just being able to draw on that too as an adult with what you do now. Like there's just so much there to inspire you, I would think.
Yes, totally. And this was before the world of Instagram and social media or even smartphones. So I wish we had more pictures, but whatever we have is still wonderful.
Yes. Did you identify as a creative kid while you were growing up in those situations, or like?
Oh God, totally not.
No, really. So how did you spend your time when you were not in school? Like how did you entertain yourselves?
Well, honestly, I was a people pleaser, and this comes from having to prove yourself every couple of years.
Yes.
And it was hard to be picked to answer questions because nobody knew your name. Oftentimes they couldn't pronounce your name, right? Because it was a different region of India. And so India is not homogenous in any aspect.
No.
So language and music, everything is different. So oftentimes kids would be speaking in another language. And so you'd have to kind of insert yourself in the conversation or hang out on your own. So I was a people pleaser. And so I would be looking forward to making friends and raising my hand. And so creativity, now that I identify as a creative person, because I didn't before, but now that I do, I feel that comes with my freedom of choice as well. Now that I can choose to do what I want to do, I can choose to be creative, because to me that's connected to the freedom. And as a kid, right, when you're moving, you're looking for good grades, you're looking for friends, and you need to be out there. And
you're just trying to fit in.
Yes, you're trying to fit in, and you're not really thinking about, I want to sit and write. Which I did. I mean, to be fair, I wrote in bursts all through my childhood, but never really thought of myself as creative because I didn't draw, I didn't paint, and those were the acceptable forms of creativity because it was art class, right?
Yes. I know. That's when we started this podcast, Lisa and I really wanted to take the conversation away from creative meaning that you paint. It just seems to be what people automatically default to. Oh, you're an artist, you must paint.
Yes. Well, that definition is still there, because I talked to my younger one about creativity the other day, and she is this amazing creative powerhouse with elastic bands. So she's been rainbow looming all through all through the pandemic, our times of quarantine, and she's created these amazing creations, for want of a better word, out of elastic bands. And I wish I could show you. Of course, I can't because we're on an audio. But what I wanted to say is that she thinks of herself as someone who's not creative because she hates to draw and she thinks she can't really, sketch and paint. And that definition still is around.
Yeah,
right?
it's perpetuated today. And it's funny how many people who are extremely creative don't view themselves that way at all, for exactly what you just said, the same reason your daughter doesn't think she's creative. But I believe we're all creative. We just haven't figured out the right outlet. If you don't consider yourself creative, and you just haven't found your outlet yet. But there's an outlet for you, and you can be creative with words, you can be creative with food, you can be creative with numbers. There's so many ways you can be creative. Programmers are creative. That's, people who write code are creative. They're problem solvers. That's creativity. So, yes.
And we often don't think of it like that, right? Because in my corporate career, I was all about marketing strategy and planning. I thought of myself as a non-creative numbers person. But now that I think of the solutions that I offered myself during those years, they were all creative solutions. I just didn't have the right way of looking at it, right?
And that's interesting because I think of marketing as a very creative sphere. So just goes to show.
Yes, just goes to show. It's often just our own perspective, the way we look at ourselves, that we need to shift. And sometimes that shift comes with more awareness and more knowledge.
Absolutely. So you actually wound up going to university for marketing, I believe, marketing and tourism, I think.
Yes, I did my master's in tourism management, 100 years ago.
And what led you down that path? What sparked your interest in that? Was it because you were moving around so much as a kid, or was it something completely unrelated?
Well, as a kid, in grade 12, I went for my first whitewater rafting trip. So I used to love.
I saw that on your website that you wanted to be a you wanted to be a whitewater rafting guide.
I did a number of whitewater rafting trips. I had the most amazing times riding those rapids and that sense of zero control that we had, and let nature guide us. And it was wonderful. I loved it. And at one point I thought, I'm going to make this my career. It didn't quite work out because career equals, right? Career equals an income and being able to sustain yourself. So it didn't work out. And perhaps it was for the good of everybody around me, right? But it was such an enjoyable thing that I thought, okay, if I do masters in tourism, then that kind of helps me connect whitewater rafting with tourism and traveling. And of course, I have this inbuilt desire to travel. I have traveled so much in my life from India and then also from Canada and from the Middle East where we used to live. And that joy and that sense of wonder that you can get connecting with other people, other nations, languages is just, it comes with traveling. And I hope with this pandemic, things can ease up a little bit soon so that we can get back to some of that joy, right?
I think there is an entire population of the planet Earth who agrees with you on that.
Yes.
I think people really do miss just being able to connect with other people and like physically connect in person and to see other parts of the world. And I can't wait. I can say that for sure. But you did wind up living in the Middle East. I think you lived in Dubai. Is that correct?
Yes. My husband and I, we got married in 1998, ages ago. And then somehow the universe shifted So I hadn't really left India on a holiday or what have you till I was 24. And then my husband and I went on a honeymoon to the south of Spain from India, spent 3 wonderful weeks traveling the buses and exploring the beaches. And then we came back to normal life in India and settled in, and we had a new apartment, and we were settling in this lovely college town of Pune, which is in Western India. And it was a great start. We thought we're getting settled. I had all these wedding gifts from our registry. Wonderful, wonderful time, right? In those early years. And then my husband got this opportunity to move to Dubai. And we thought, okay, we just about had started putting down roots in Pune as a married couple. And we thought, okay, let's uproot and move to Dubai. And that's what we did. Lived there for the next 5 years. Had a wonderful time. No kids. So I call that life BK, before kids. Traveled. I worked for British Airways for that time there. And I worked in their marketing team and headed up marketing for certain parts in the Middle East for the Levant area, which was an excellent experience because British Airways, I managed to travel a lot. And my husband and I would take these amazing weekend trips because as an employee of British Airways, you got the employee benefits of traveling subload is what we used to call it. So it was subject to a seat being available. And there were often times that you would get offloaded right at the time of the departure time of the plane. And the times that you did not get offloaded, you ended up on a flight to Amsterdam and spent 2 days there. And right, it was a great experience to be able to pack a small bag and jump on a plane and go exploring.
Yes.
It was wonderful.
Growing up.
And Dubai is great for that. Yeah. And Dubai it's great for that because it's kind of a hub in halfway between Asia, between India and Europe. And so the flights are shorter and we flew to Kenya and to Europe, and there's just so much possibility from there.
Yes. Dubai fascinates me. I have never been there, but I am so just fascinated about everything I see and read about it. And I just find it so interesting that you lived there. Just, what was it like?
It's an odd place. Oh. It's this beautiful, gorgeous, perfect city in the middle of the desert.
Yeah.
And it's all constructed. So Dubai is, the rest of the area, Oman and Bahrain, they're beautiful and they have a lot of natural beauty as well. Whereas Dubai is literally this patch of desert by the water that has been constructed out of nothing.
It's like Las Vegas.
So there are these
also fascinates me. Like they're very similar, just these cities that came out of nothing, and they don't make sense in a way. It's hard to explain.
It's funny you compare it to Vegas because I've never been to Vegas, but what I've heard of it, that it's in the middle of the desert and it's just something huge and enormous and beautiful in the middle of nowhere, right? And that's how Dubai is too, right? It's just the only thing is the opportunity to experience nature is so limited in Dubai that if you want to have a connection to nature, then you just can't, or you have to leave and go somewhere else, which is what we ended up doing. Because everything is constructed, everything is indoors. 8 months of the year the temperature is 40 plus degrees.
Yeah.
And so there are the most beautiful ski lifts and ice skating rinks, and
all
there's
indoors?
a zoo too, but they're all indoors.
Oh, that's so. I can picture the ice rink, but the ski lift, I don't know. I mean, I live right next to the mountains. That's so strange to me to have an indoor ski lift, but it doesn't surprise me with a city like Dubai.
Because they have the money, and they also want to connect people to the experiences, which is so important, right? But because it's desert, the experience has to be created artificially. And so that after a point, it became clear to me that it wasn't the right place for me because it was not real.
What was it? What was the opportunity that took you away from Dubai? Was it just that you didn't want to be there anymore, or did something come along that actually was like, oh, this would be fun. Let's try this.
Well, about halfway through our life there, so we were there for almost 5 years. So in about year 2, I accepted that this wasn't the forever place. It wasn't the place we wanted to put down roots. And we had done camping in the desert and under the stars and gone for these desert car rallies and bought a car especially to navigate the sand dunes.
Oh, wow.
It was, yes, it was wonderful, right? But there are a lot of opportunities to explore the desert. But then I knew that I yearned for something more green. And so there was the opportunity, both my husband and I sat down and we thought about, okay, if we continue to move westwards away from India, and this was our long, glorious adventure that we were going to go on, we could move to Canada. And that's how it came about. We applied to immigrate to Canada. The paperwork came through in a couple of years. It took a little longer than we expected, but I think that was just the universe helping us have a couple of more years of this life of travel and impermanence in Dubai. And then we packed up and we moved.
And here you are.
And yes. And in between, we managed to travel a lot. But we landed in Toronto and we were here for a few months.
And when was that? Like around what year was that? I'm just trying to get a sense of.
This was in 2003.
Okay.
We arrived in Toronto. We had friends here and we arrived here, and I started working with British Airways. Again, the universe wanted me to have a sense of continuation with my job. My husband also started working with the same bank that he had worked with previously. So there was a continuation of our careers. But a few months later, we found out that I was pregnant.
That's a big switch. That's a big change.
Yes, right. And then a few months into my pregnancy, we found out that there was an opportunity for us to continue to move westwards and move to Calgary.
Oh, I didn't know you wound up in Calgary. I thought you were in Ontario the whole time. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we moved to Calgary, and it was the best decision we made. We were there for almost 8 years. In fact, this month, or maybe next, Calgary is the longest that my husband and I have lived in any one city.
Wow.
Till now. Yes. Yes. And that was a great experience, right? Because Calgary is such a wonderful, different city from Toronto. And we had a chance to explore a little bit of the West that we wouldn't have otherwise.
Right. I mean, yes, that's one of the things with Canada. It's so big that it really is hard to see it from coast to coast for most people. It's just very time consuming.
Yeah, especially for first generation immigrants. And it's, we tend to land in the one spot and then explore a little bit around it and then put down roots and settle in. And then it gets hard to travel to Nunavut or to Whistler or Tofino, because life gets in the way. So if you have the opportunity, I mean, that would be my one suggestion to anyone, any of our friends who moved to Canada since then. That's my advice. Just explore as much as you can, because once you have kids and once you put down roots, it gets harder to explore the distance, because Canada is huge. It's unexpectedly big, right?
It really is. When I was young, when I had a corporate career, a lot of what I did was training across. So I actually did get to travel across a lot of the country, and often to very small towns, not Toronto and Montreal. But 2 years ago, we decided to do a road trip with my other business, and we went from Vancouver all the way to Halifax, and we visited every province except Newfoundland and Prince Edward Island. Those are the only two I haven't been to at this point. But we did it by car, and it was a month-long trip. And
oh, wow.
I still feel like we didn't, I feel like there's so much we didn't see. It's so big, but it's such an amazing experience to do it all in one trip like that, because you really do get to appreciate the scenery as it changes, because it changes so dramatically from one province to the next, but also just the people. I found it an amazing experience from a people perspective, because, and we're going to get into food in a minute, but we did it as a food trip. We spent a lot of time going to farms and producers and getting to meet a lot of the people who grow or make the food that we eat every day. And food can be something that brings people together, but it can also be quite divisive at times. But the one thing that I really noticed on this trip was like these people are very aware that they're feeding the country, and they are so proud of the fact that they're feeding the country. And to them, it really is, it's a calling. Like, it is a special person that does that. And I think sometimes, a lot of the time, I don't think they get the credit that they deserve. And most of them are just, you know, you hear a lot of things about factory farming and all this stuff, but the people we met, they're just families. They are feeding the country. They're feeding their own families what they grow or what they produce. And they're just, it was a really amazing experience, and one I'm so grateful that I got to have. And I would really like to go back out and do something similar to that again one day. But it was,
I am so envious of this, because this is my dream trip to, you know, explore small corners of Canada and learn more and share more about people who grow our food, because you're so right. It's so important, right? And there's such little we know about the food we eat, and we can't survive without food. And I was reading something that it's the most searched for and shared. So food is the most searched for and shared, but it's also the most underappreciated part of our life. And there is so little we know about it, right?
So little. And it's really eye-opening we had the opportunity to be on a farm that produces eggs. We went to apple orchards. We went to beef cattle farms. We went to just dairy farms. We did all of it. We even went to this one little place. This was my favorite spot on the entire trip. It was in Saskatchewan, and it was this place we had to drive about an hour and a half from Saskatoon in the evening to get to it. They had a pizza night on this farm every Friday and Saturday through the summer. They did these oven baked pizzas outside, and you could order your pizzas, and everything that was on the pizzas either came from that farm or from a local farm nearby. And they had a huge bonfire, and we were in the middle of nowhere, and we were getting there, and I was starting to get very nervous because it was dark and there was nobody around for miles. I'm like, is there going to be anybody else there when we get there? And there was. It was like the entire neighboring communities all came, and there was kids and dogs and people all gathered around the fire who didn't know each other, eating their pizzas, and they made free hot chocolate for everyone. And it was this little old couple who had been doing this for years, and their family helped them. And it was the loveliest night of the whole trip for me. And they were just so passionate about what they did, and they just wanted to share it with the community. And I loved it. It was just, yes, heartwarming. But like,
that is so wonderful.
And there's hundreds of places like that across the country that, we just don't even know exist, but they're just, I don't know. That to me is what Canada is all about. It's not the big cities. It's these people in these smaller communities who are doing these things that bring people together around food. It was just very, it had quite an impact on me. But that is something that you have really dived into since you arrived here. You have really gotten into the world of food. You started your blog, I believe, around 2016. Is that right?
16 is right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's Maple and Marigold. And what was it that made you decide that this is something you wanted to do?
It was part of my journey, and I thought I've been thinking about what encouraged me to write. And it all started out, with, I thought I wasn't a creative person. But our experience of moving to Canada and the rootless life that I have led has led me to push myself to put down roots. And I found there are so many people like me, right? We pull up our roots and travel from one end of the earth to another, move to Canada with the things that we literally can pack in just 2 suitcases, because that's what is allowed on most aircrafts. You can carry your life in 2 suitcases. That's what we did. I had, my one suitcase was kitchen stuff, so some dishes and things that I was attached to in Dubai, and the other suitcase was mostly books and some clothes. And that's what many people do who immigrate to Canada. We come with our belongings, we leave our family behind, and we move to Canada to make a new life. And as I started to write, so I started writing in, I think it was 2014 or 15. That's when I made a habit of sitting down and writing and talking about to myself, because that's how it starts, right? You need to start talking to yourself about how you can help nourish that connection with your roots when your roots are so far away. And then you realize that you can put down your roots wherever you are. So putting down roots was such a big part of our life here, the first transition that we had to make. And that's how I started writing, that it became a way for me to express the journey from India to Canada with many stops in between, right? And that's how the name came to be too. Maple and Marigold it started out as my love letter. Maple represents Canada. Marigold represents my roots in India. And Maple and Marigold was how a lot of people found me as well, right? With the cultural fusion, a little bit of maple, a little bit of marigold. And that influence it comes through in the food I cook, in the stories I write. And it's who I am.
Yes. And I think that's like a lovely way to put it. Had you moved back to Toronto when you started Maple and Marigold, or were you still in Calgary at that time?
We had just moved back to Toronto when I started writing. I actually took, till then I had worked crazy hours in my marketing career, and both my kids went to daycare 1 year after they were born, off to daycare. In fact, my older one was, I call her my daycare kid because she, that's what we did. And then we moved to Toronto, and my younger one was 2.5 years old, and we thought, okay, new city. We've moved from Calgary to Toronto. Need to find new schools and new home. I thought I'll take a step slow and see how life takes us. And then I started writing. And of course, Toronto being what it is, it's the commute is crazy. And so any job that I was applying for, I was trying to factor in the commute, and 45 minutes on a good day without any snow is a hard commute to factor in when you come from Calgary, where we lived downtown. We lived in inner city Calgary, and I worked a 15-minute walk away. So it was easy to manage with kids. But here, there are so many other things you think about, right? It's such a big city in Toronto.
Yeah, especially if you're further out, if you're not right in the downtown core. It's, yeah. I usually stay in Etobicoke.
So those are the things we factor in Etobicoke, did you say?
When I'm in Toronto, I usually stay in Etobicoke. I have a really good friend there, and so I very rarely stay right in the city, but I'm usually there for work, and I have to do the commute in from, and Etobicoke is very close. Like, it's still on the streetcar line. So it's not like really far out, but it's still, if you take the streetcar, it's still almost an hour to get downtown. I mean, you can kind of cut that in half if you want to take a bus and head up to the subway. But yeah, it's a long commute. I understand.
It is. We live in Midtown, Uptown Toronto, so it's not far for getting close to schools, and the TTC is right here. But the work that I was looking at, somehow the way the universe, because I think the universe wanted me to make a decision, and the work that I was finding that was interesting to me was 45 minutes away in the suburbs of Toronto. So it was, I think it was a reverse commute. Yes. And that would have been good if you didn't have little kids, right?
Yes.
Not in rush hour. So no. I thought, okay, I will try this whole work from home, be creative, start my own blogging platform and figure it out. And that's what I did. I started writing. And then it became, from a hobby, it became a business. And I realized there were so many people like me who have the experience of moving from one part of the world to moving to Canada. And then we feel we need to start our life and our friendships all over again. And there was other people who, we all have the same experience, right? Whether we're moving from Lebanon or from India or from Sri Lanka, there's just such a variety of people in Toronto and in Canada. And food connects us in more ways than we can imagine.
It absolutely does. And I think it's something that so many Canadians can relate to. I mean, most of us, I think the vast majority of us, if are first or second generation Canadians. I'm a first generation Canadian on my mom's side. I'm a second generation on my dad's side. And food from all my cultures, I'm like a mix of 4 or 5, from all those cultures has always been such a big part of who I was growing up. And I think that it is I think Canadian cuisine, for lack of a better word, is very much a fusion cuisine of all the immigrants that have made Canada their home and brought their foods with them and figured out a way to fuse what they're used to or comfortable with this new place that they're in and what's available to them here. And it makes for some delicious food. I'll say that.
Totally. And, there's such a similarity in my head. The fabric of Canada is so similar to the fabric in India. India is also made up of all these very different influences from over the hundreds of years. And there's, it's how it's becomes this rich, colorful fabric of spices and dances and music. Everything is different. And I think I feel Canada is the same, except that it's just spread out, that colorful fabric is spread out over such a different, large landscape, right?
Yes.
Even the landscape is so remarkable and huge,
Yes.
stretching coast to coast.
Absolutely. And a lot of it's very empty. So
A lot of it is empty, right? Which is not like India at all. It's very hard not to bump into people, especially in the cities in India.
So as you got underway with Maple and Marigold, you have really, it has evolved quite a bit over the last few years. And I think you've really kind of found your place with it now. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, totally. It's given me an opportunity to find my voice.
Yeah.
When I started writing years ago, I found I was writing stories more about food and about people and families, things that were good for us, that tasted good and were bright and colorful and delicious. And it all came back to food. And slowly over the years, I find that the things that I feel most strongly about diversity and inclusion, and again, the colorful stories in food, all of that is so important to me. And Maple and Marigold has become an opportunity, a place where I can share that with a wider community. I feel as if Maple and Marigold has evolved as my knowledge has evolved. There are so many things that are important to all of us right now, and they've always been important, about being diverse and including people and giving people a voice to speak. And Maple and Marigold has come from my desire to do all of that and to be green.
Yes.
I mean, being sustainable is so important to me. It was how I was raised, where we were matter of fact about health and wellness, and matter of fact about use what we have, reduce what we can, use only what we need, and for God's sake, don't throw away anything.
Yeah.
And I think our life today is I found it was a little bit opposite of what I had grown up learning. And so it was very important for me to go back to a little bit of that and to help people as well, others like me, who we're all in the same boat, right? If we're trying to save money and use what we have and reduce our food waste, reduce single-use plastic, and there is so much we can do if we just make the choices that we're making every day, if we make them differently.
Yes, amen.
Yeah.
And I do think it's interesting, though, because, my mom came from the UK. Her mother was a Hungarian refugee to the UK. So she was born towards the end of World War II. And, the UK went through rationing well into the 50s. When she first came to Canada in the early 1970s, and she went into a supermarket for the first time, she could not get over the fresh food that was available. Like, she had never seen anything like that. And, my dad grew up here, but my grandmother, she was young and growing up during the Great Depression. And just the way that I was raised was very much like, you don't waste anything. Like, nothing gets wasted. You reuse. My mom was like that crazy woman in the 1970s who packed us all into the station wagon with all the recycling, because you didn't have blue boxes then, right? She would pack us in and drive us to the nearest recycling depot to get rid of all the newspapers and the bottles and things. And it was like, I just remember being like, why can't you just be like all the other moms and just like, because I grew up in the late 70s and 80s, and all my friends had the prepackaged lunch items and all that stuff, and we didn't. My mom made bread. She did all those things. And I just remember being like horribly feeling out of place, because we were like, I felt like it meant we were poor or something. I don't know. Like, I just had so many issues wrapped up around it. And now as an adult, I look back on it and it's like, man, my mom would fit right in today. Like I see so many bloggers doing the things that she did growing up, and it's funny how it's come full circle. Like we're starting to realize that the ways that our parents and our grandparents lived were far more sustainable and green than the way we have lived in the last few generations. So it's really interesting to watch it all come back around. And I'm so grateful to my parents for the skills that I learned growing up, like gardening and baking and being able to cook and being able to sew, to fix my own clothes, things like that. Yeah, today I'm very happy that that's how I grew up, but I hated it when I was a kid.
Yeah, but it's such an experience, and it turns around. It has turned around so much in the last, 15, 20 years, because there was this movement to our food and our life needs to be made more convenient and faster and efficient. And now that we're realizing that speed and efficiency and convenience, all of that took us down this path where we're using too much.
Yes.
Too much, because we don't need all of that, right? If we reduced our shopping list, if we reduced what we threw away, and that's how my parents and grandparents were, and maybe they were right. I would never say that to my mom, that mommy were always right. Right? But she totally was. She totally is. I think it's a matter of raising awareness, right? Of the impact that our choices can make, because those Lunchables and those convenience foods and the TV dinners, the resources that we use that go into creating that, and then the resources that are used after we throw some of it away, because Canadians are really bad at this. I have to say, there's so much research that we throw away more than half of what we produce. I mean, 58% of the food that we produce in Canada is literally thrown away.
It's disgusting.
And yes.
It really
and
is.
It's a huge impact on our wallet, on the environment, and that's despite there being hunger and food insecurity, with so many people, thousands of families go through this. Mm-hmm. And it just offends me how much I throw away, or used to throw away. The last 2 years, I've been forcing myself to shift my habits. And that's part of the things that I, share on Maple and Marigold, that we can make the small changes that can have a big impact down the road. We can do it.
Absolutely.
If we knew how, right?
I think that's a big part of it. I think a lot of people just don't know how. I think more and more people are definitely realizing that things have to change, and they're becoming more and more aware of, well, when I put this thing at the curb, what happens to it? And understanding that, yes, recycling is great, but recycling still takes up a lot of resources. And so maybe it's better if we just use less in the first place, Yes, and we recycle, as Canadians, we recycle less than 9% of our plastic. So yes, we're filling up our blue bins, and we're making sure we rinse them out and put them where we think they're going to be recycled. But at the end of the day, only 9% of the plastic we use is getting recycled. And I think recycling is not a solution anymore, sadly. Yes, and I think we've all seen the news stories of where our recycling winds up. It's not good.
And Malaysia and China and India, who used to buy our recycling from us and convert it into, cheap, made from plastic goods that we would buy back from these countries, then are no longer doing that, because they have their own mess to clean up. So there is a movement of countries that traditionally were purchasing our recycling from the US and Canada, who are not doing so anymore. So now we need to figure out a way to clean up our own mess, right?
Yes. And that's going to be interesting to watch over the next few years.
Right. And, some of the things that I've learned about good food, where we talk about we want, and by we, I mean parents, we want to feed our kids good food and make sure that it's healthy and it has the nutritional value that they need to make them strong adults, right? That's what I used to obsess about it when they were little. But good food is more than it's more than a composite of nutritional characteristics. It's also the effort that has gone into raising that food and growing it. And it's about more than its impact on just us. So if we think of good food as just how it impacts our health and our family's health, then that's a limited way to look at it. How about if we expand that view and actually looked at what went into growing that food? So it goes back to the farmers if they need our support to grow that food and the resources that went into growing that food. It's just, that definition of good food has to be expanded. And if we can think about the environment in that as well, then it's all to our own benefit and our children's benefit and the life that they should lead.
It's very true what you're saying. And I think it's a lot more complicated than just going to the grocery store and buying a bag of potatoes, And most of us have the luxury of not having to think about that. We go to the grocery store, we buy our bag of potatoes, or we buy a package of ground beef or a box of crackers or whatever it is. And we don't really think about where it came from or how it got to us or the whole process behind it.
And we haven't seen any different, right?
No.
Because we've grown up in this generation of plenty and convenience.
Yes.
And wonder, where you can walk into a grocery store and find it stocked 24/7, and not just stocked with the best looking produce that you can find anywhere in the world. It still is so wonderful to me to walk into a grocery store and be able to just pick up the things I need anytime I want.
Yes.
But if we knew better, like if we knew what goes into growing that perfect produce, how a lot of it is thrown away because it is not perfect enough to end up on our grocery shelf. If we knew better, we would definitely do better, right?
I think we would. We're in a position of extreme privilege, where we don't have to, where we haven't really had to think about these things very much until recently. And I think now more people are realizing that there is more that goes into this, and we only have one planet and there's a lot of people on it who are hungry, and we need to figure this out. And is that what led you to create Nourish by Numbers?
Yes. So Nourish by Numbers started out as my initiative, my advocacy initiative to raise awareness and help people talk about making better food choices and what goes into growing the food. It actually started out as a hashtag, 1,000 Ways to Nourish. If you look for that hashtag on Instagram or Facebook, you'll be able to see the old posts. And then from the 1,000 Ways to Nourish hashtag, it grew into Nourish by Numbers, because there was a need for it to be a stable platform. And that's how it ended up. And now between Maple and Marigold, I find my desire to be sustainable and lead a more green life is also very obvious on Maple and Marigold, right? Because being abundant, leading a colorful, sustainable life, that's all part of the good life that we want to have and we want to leave behind for our kids.
What are your goals for the two different platforms over the next little bit of time?
So I would like to reach as many people as possible with this message, that we can all, with working together, we can all lead an abundant, sustainable, colorful life. But I'd like to reach as many people as possible. And that's part of growing the community around Maple and Marigold. And also Nourish by Numbers, because there is so much going on in the political landscape around sustainability.
Yes.
And Nourish by Numbers is a place where people can go to find reliable information that is science-based, that has been endorsed by the smartest minds in the world. And by that, I mean the United Nations. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals are So Nourish by Numbers is aligned with the UN SDGs, and there has been a lot that's going on, work that has been done by United Nations on this. And Nourish by Numbers is aligned with those goals, which is wonderful. But we need to reach more people. Mm-hmm. And also with the global pandemic, what are we going to do, right? It's been hard for people the last few months. And oftentimes making the green choice it has been harder to stay safe. And so being green has fallen off the wagon a little bit. I mean, in my case, if I give an example, I had not bought paper towels for years. And then in the last 6 months, paper towels are back on my shopping list because they are a way that I know I can clean my kitchen counter and then I can throw it away and not worry about making my kids sick. Mm-hmm. So there are some choices where I feel as if I've taken a step back on. And then there are other choices where we've made strides on, like working from home and using the car less, making sure we are using what we have in our pantry. I mean, that's such a big thing right now, right? Yes. We don't want to go grocery shopping because that increases our exposure. And so we shop what we have. We cook from our pantry. And that's one of the really great ways to be green right now, to use what we have and to cook with what we have. So unknowingly, we have made big strides in leading a green life while we were worrying about, let's stay at home.
It's been really interesting this year. I'm a big gardener. I have a big veggie garden in my backyard. And this year, I think every single one of my neighbors has put in a veggie garden plot. Like normally, if I have too much, there's always neighbors who are more than happy to take extras off my hands. And this year, I had nobody to give my extras to because everybody had decided that this was the year they were going to grow a garden. And I love it. Like, it's wonderful to see so many people have put little plots in their front yards, which is not something you see in Vancouver very often. I have seen it in Toronto many times when I've gone for walks there, but yeah, people are planting squash and tomatoes in their front yards. And I think it all comes out of this realization that, maybe they don't want to go to the grocery store as often, or maybe they're not sure where things come from or who's picked them up or touched them. So they're looking for other ways. And I'm all for more plants and greenery in our lives and yards. And if you can grow something that feeds you at the same time, that's wonderful in my book. So I hope people continue with those, even when we are hopefully eventually able to go back to normal, in quotation marks. I hope that some of these things continue on, but
totally. I mean, there was such a huge movement, right? On Instagram, grow your own food. And so many of us did it. I was around this summer, every summer for the last many years. I've spent weeks and months in India.
That's part of it. People didn't go anywhere this summer.
Right? And we were all around. And so we grew our own food. And I think it was partly also, yes, we didn't want to go grocery shopping. But the other part, at least from what I've seen, is people wanted to connect with something. And nature is, in times of this isolation where we don't have as much human connection, we always have nature around us. And putting seeds in the ground and then watching them grow. My kids did that. And it's such a joy to see and to wait, because it takes much longer than you expect for that first sprout to come out and then for the plant to actually give fruit. It takes a long time. It teaches us patience.
Yes, absolutely.
And it gives that feeling of connection that we needed so desperately in the summer.
I think connection, to me, it's also in a way very meditative, and it's like pulling weeds for me, going out and weeding or just, plucking around out in the garden it's a big stress reliever for me. I go out there and all I hear is the birds and, a little bit of traffic, but it's just me and my plants. And there's something very calming about that I find very helpful to managing my stress. So yeah, I hope we see more people continue on with that. But I love what you're doing. It's a wonderful initiative, and I'm really excited to see where it goes. So we're coming up on the end of the episode, and you're going to be back next week. We've already said we're going to be talking a little bit about marketing and finding ways to get yourself on television with some TV segments and things like that, which I think is going to be very interesting. But before we sign off, where can people find you?
So the best way to find me is on Maple and Marigold. So sign up for my newsletter. I do a monthly newsletter on mapleandmarigold.com. There's a sign up there, and you get a free ebook when you sign up. So that's the advantage, other than the fact that you can also stay in touch with me. And then also on Instagram and Facebook. So Maple and Marigold is my social media handle on most of my platforms. So that's a great way to stay in touch. Nourished by Numbers is also a place where I often share that is specific to sustainability and advocacy. So you will find me there, but I'm most active on Maple and Marigold.
And we will have all of the links to Maple and Marigold, Nourished by Numbers, and Puneeta's social media handles in the show notes. So you can check them out there if you want a quick click link. Puneeta, thank you so much. It has been so nice to have you here and getting to know a little bit more about you. I really kind of felt...
This was wonderful.
I feel like you're a citizen of the world, and it's just been really lovely to have you here. I love what you're doing, and I'm really excited. And yes, if there's any way I can help you push it forward, please let me know. I would love to help with that. That's it for this week, everyone.
Wonderful.
That's it for this week, everyone. We will see you all next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for joining us for the And She Looked Up Creative Hour. If you're looking for links or resources mentioned in this episode, you can find detailed show notes on our website at andshелookedup.com. While you're there, be sure to sign up for our newsletter for more business tips, profiles of inspiring Canadian creative women, and so much more. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the show via your podcast app of choice so you never miss an episode. We always love to hear from you, so we'd love it if you'd leave us a review through iTunes or Apple Podcasts. Drop us a note via our website at andshелookedup.com, or come say hi on Instagram at andshелookedup. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.